I think that the days of being a photographer only are almost completely gone. And if you're not shooting video today, you're going to be left behind. Hey everybody, my name is David J. Orozco and I am a photographer and filmmaker. And a lot of the times I do both of those things at the same time. I provide both photo and video to clients, which allows me to charge more money, provide more value to my clients, and differentiate myself because I have an additional skill that photographer onlys don't have. More importantly, you need to be putting out video if you want your content engaged with on social media, on Instagram, on TikTok, whether it's for yourself, for your own brand, for other businesses, you need to be shooting video. And so I'm gonna help you today to set up your camera to be able to record video with one button. One button gets you into recording video and that same button gets you back into shooting photos. And so let's dive straight into it. I'm going to be setting this up on Sony cameras, specifically a Sony a7 IV. Now, this should apply to most, if not all, Sony cameras. And this idea also applies to Canon. And I'll do my best having used both Sony and Canon to describe this for both. However, certain menu items are going to be specific to Sony, but you will have this in Canon as well. Now that those details are out of the way, let's set up your camera so that you can get shooting. On the Sony a7 IV, you have this switch on the top that allows you to switch back and forth between photo and video. A lot of times you have to take your eye off of the viewfinder to be able to see that and switch it over. This way allows you to not do that. If you go into your menu, you're gonna be looking at the red menu, specifically image quality. You're gonna click that and then you'll go down to the setting that has a video icon and says file format. You can click that and then click OK. And now you're looking at all of the qualities that your camera can record. Because I'm shooting on the a7 IV, I have XAVC, HS4K, S4K, SHD, SI4K, SIHD. There are really two options here that I mainly bounce back and forth for hybrid shooting, and that is HS4K and SHD. If I'm potentially wanting to crop in on my footage later on in editing, then I'm gonna pick HS4K. Otherwise, if I'm wanting to conserve memory card space on my camera, and I don't necessarily need the best quality, but HD looks pretty dang good, then I'm gonna pick SHD. So pick either one of those, and then it'll bring you back to the menu. You'll go down one item, and that says movie settings. You'll click that, click OK. You go to record frame rate. I always, for hybrid shooting, shoot in 60p. So you're gonna click 60p and then go to record setting. For record setting, your numbers may vary for this, but what you're looking at are a first number. For me, it's 50M, and that means 50 megabits per second. The next number is 422, and the third number is 10-bit. What you want are essentially the highest numbers in this. So I'm gonna pick the very top number, which is 50 megabits per second at 422, 10-bit. If your camera shoots 10-bit, you want to choose that 10-bit option. All that this means is that this is going to allow you the most leeway in editing. Maybe the white balance wasn't the best and you need to make some color adjustments there. Maybe the exposure wasn't nailed and you need to raise or lower that. This is going to give you the most leeway to do that. Pick 10-bit. The next thing that I'm gonna do here is make sure that I'm shooting in auto ISO. For photos, I typically shoot auto ISO. There are times where I will take manual control over that, but for 90% of the time, I shoot auto. So to set this up, go to your second menu. It's the pink exposure menu. You're gonna go to 1, and then you're gonna go to ISO. You'll click that, and you'll scroll until you reach the ISO auto setting. Click that. And it's super important to note that you set the ISO 100 and where it says ISO 3200, set those ranges, because that's the range that the ISO auto is going to function in. Set the left one to ISO 100, and I'd recommend setting the right one to ISO 25600. This is just the range that the auto ISO will function in. You can also set the ISO range limit, which is coming next. And then go down to ISO range limit. You can set the range limit. I set it down to ISO 50 and all the way up to ISO 51200. And lastly, if you're shooting in aperture priority mode, which I would recommend for photos, then you will have this ISO Auto Min SS. That stands for the minimum shutter speed that the camera will go down to if it needs to. And so you want to click that and then set that for 1/125th of a second. This is important because when you record video, this also applies as well, and you don't want your shutter speed dropping down below that for recording video. If it goes above that, that's totally fine in this particular situation. And in video, there's this rule that says your shutter speed should be double your frame rate, which should be 1/120th of a second. But in this case, 1/125th is the closest shutter speed. We're making a compromise here and saying that we don't want it to go below that, but we also aren't gonna control it if it goes above that. If it does, that's okay. The only consequence there is that your footage may look a little bit sharper and movement may look a little bit more sharp in your video. Shooting in aperture mode is super convenient. However, my preferred method is actually to shoot in manual mode. The reason for this is that way I can control the shutter speed and the aperture while leaving the ISO in auto ISO. That way in video, I can still control those things. And if I need to manipulate them via whatever situation that I'm in to adapt to that, then I can do that easily. As another tip, I have the ISO on my camera assigned to the scroll wheel on the back. So if I rotate that to the left, it'll eventually get to ISO auto. If I rotate that to the right, it'll come out of auto, and now I have manual control over my ISO. Now that we've set this up, all you have to do is go to your photo shoot, and when you're shooting photos and want to record video, all you have to do is hit this record button on the top of the camera. It may be in a different spot depending on the camera body that you have, but if you hit this record button on the top of your camera, it'll immediately jump into recording video, and it's gonna be recording 60 frames a second, which means that later on in editing, you have the option of potentially slowing this down 40%. And so all I have to do is then click the record button again, and it records that, and I'm back into being able to shoot photos. This is exactly how I shoot both photo and video simultaneously at events. I've done this at business events where I'm covering an event for them, say a rock climbing event, and I'm there shooting photos, but I also want to get some video. And so I'll shoot my photos, click the record button, record some video, and then jump back into shooting photos. The one thing that you can run into, depending on your camera and also depending on the memory cards that you're using, is running into buffer. What that means is that sometimes when you're shooting a bunch of photos all at once and then you want to record video immediately, the camera may not allow you to do that because it's busy writing those photos to your card. This could be due to one of two things. One, it could be just your camera. Older cameras, earlier than the A7 IV and the other 4th generation Sony cameras, typically the buffer doesn't write as fast. The other thing that this could be due to is the type of cards that you're using. If your camera allows using UHS 2 cards and with write speeds higher than, let's say, 150 megabytes per second, that is the ideal that you'd want to use for hybrid shooting, because you're recording a lot of information in a very short time and you don't want that to be limited by the type of cards that you're using. Go to your local camera store and let them know that you're looking for UHS 2 cards that ideally are writing over 150 megabytes per second, and you should be good there. The last thing here that I want to mention for maybe some of the more advanced photographers and videographers is that you're not able to control the picture profile independently for video as for photos. So whatever you pick for photo is the picture profile that it's going to use for video. Really, the only negative about this is that ideally I would like to use S-Log3, which is a picture profile in the Sony bodies that allows for the most dynamic range in editing. And it records a very flat image, so that way later in editing, you can then bring back the colors and the contrast in that. However, I don't want to use that for photos. So what this means is that likely you're going to be using a normal picture profile. Maybe it's a flat profile or a neutral profile, and that's what your video is going to be coming out as. This is a sacrifice that I'm willing to make because it's still 10-bit files and I still have the leeway to be able to edit those files later on. It's not as much leeway as I would like, but for the most part, it is still really good quality video. That is going to do it for me, guys. If you have any additional questions, please leave them down in the comments. I would love to hear from you, and I hope that this helps you provide more value to your clients, be able to charge more money, and also be able to start marketing yourself via video on social media. My name is David J. Orozco, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.